The sentence landed like a champagne flute cracking on marble. If you want to give me a gift, Mom vanished from my life. Conversations thinned in the Sequoia Club's dining room. Silver lids hovered over chafing dishes, a planner's pen paused midair, and the maitre d' stopped arranging flutes at the mimosa station. I stood with the seating chart in both hands, as if paper could shield a person. My name is on the contract for the band, my daughter said, not quite shouting, but bright enough for the rehearsal party to hear. You don't get to move people around to make yourself feel important. I'm asking to tuck Grandma Agnes a bit farther from the speakers, I answered, keeping my voice low. Her hearing aids squeal with that kind of bass. It's practical, Lena. Controlling, she corrected immaculate mouth tightening. Same thing it's always been. Drew the groom shifted weight from one polished shoe to the other and examined a non-existent spot on his cuff. His parents, Loretta and Charles Baines, veteran members with monogrammed napkin rings, shared a look that did an efficient job of pity and judgment in the space of a breath. Lena, I tried again. Step outside with me. We'll fix it in 2 minutes. This is my wedding, she said. Not your project, not your image rescue. Her eyes flicked quick and cutting toward my department store dress, the one I'd chosen for not being loud and for not being cheap. If you want to help, don't ruin it. A nearby table went quiet enough to hear ice migrate in a water glass. The planner, Marta with the clipboard, murmured something about the string quartet's arrival, then let the sentence die. I could feel 50 people waiting to see whether I'd cry or combust. I smiled. I have done harder things while smiling. 20 minutes outside, I suggested. No audience. We decide together. Color rose in Lena's face, delicate and furious. Together. You mean how it's always gone? You write the check. I owe you obedience. I am done apologizing for you. She glanced at Loretta, who lifted a linen napkin to her mouth with exquisite timing. Do us both a favor. If you love me, disappear. The room made a tiny collective mistake, every throat swallowed at once. Ms. Ellis, Marta tried hovering. I handed her the seating chart, thanked her for her patience, and walked away. My legs felt obedient, but slightly borrowed the way they had the morning I drove Lena to the pediatric ER for a fever that wouldn't break. The ladies' lounge was empty, upholstered in the kind of pale velvet you're meant to admire rather than sit on. I sat anyway. Overhead bulbs rimmed an oversized mirror. In it, I saw a woman with silver threaded into dark hair, cut neatly to the jaw so it wouldn't tangle in a seatbelt or a storm. Mother of the bride 59, Marian Ellis. I pressed 2 fingers to the pulse in my neck, then let my hands fall to my lap. I took inventory the way I do when the world tilts breathe, look, name. Velvet mirror lilies in a crystal vase. My palms smelled like hand sanitizer and lemon. Through the door, I heard a wash of voices, the planner corralling the quartet, a busboy apologizing for a dropped fork, Loretta's amused little hush. I remembered this room from years before when Lena twirled by that same mirror at 15 in a borrowed dress, and I told her the hem would be fine if she wore lower heels. She wore the tall ones anyway and blistered each heel in the first hour, then leaned into me in the car and cried because the boy she liked danced twice with someone else. It had felt that night like the purest job in the world to be the place where a person could come apart without consequence. My phone vibrated. A text from Lena. Where are you? Marta needs to confirm your entrance timing. No apology. No, I shouldn't have said that. I typed erase, typed again, not feeling well, heading home to rest. 3 dots then. Don't make this about you. Hair/makeup are set. Based on the schedule, answer Marta. I placed the phone face down on the vanity and watched my reflection breathe. When I stood, my hand steadied around my clutch. It is something to discover you can walk through a lobby after the ceiling has lowered itself by 1.5 feet. Outside, the autumn air was clean and thin. I didn't look back into the dining room as I passed. I no longer needed to see who was pretending not to watch. The drive across town took 12 minutes if the light at Pine stayed green. It didn't. I waited at red, then green, then another red, the Sequoia Club shrinking in the rear view. I told myself to think about nothing and failed at it because the mind is a raccoon and will pull on whatever glints. On Willow Street, the old brick colonial showed its best angle to the road. White trim, dark shutters, a porch that looked sturdy enough to hold a lifetime of summers. The house had belonged to my father, and after his funeral to me. When Drew's lease ended and Lena's ambitions required a mailing address with a yard, I handed them the keys and said we'd talk about paperwork after the wedding. They painted the dining room a color that made the trim look fancier, and I paid the tax bill from the same account that had paid for Braces, the swim team, the test prep coach whose motto was, get in or get over it. They never asked whose name was on the deed. They never asked because I never made them. At my bungalow, the porch light clicked on automatically, catching a moth mid-orbit. I towed off my shoes in the small front hall and carried my bag to the kitchen table. On the laundry door hung the dress I'd call sea glass blue to a saleswoman. Under the dress, a stack of place cards with careful calligraphy waited for me to thread ribbon. Beside them, a small toolkit I'd assembled: safety pins, stain pen, aspirin, tiny sewing kit. Bandages, because events go better when you respect how often fabric snags and people faint. I set the kit aside and ran water until it went cold, then hot. Between the rush and the silence, one sentence replayed in the diner bright of my kitchen: "If you love me, disappear." The words didn't feel like a knife. A knife is quick and honest. They felt like a bank error you notice after 3 months of statements, a slow subtraction disguised as normal life. Disappear, then I thought, not dramatic, grammatical. On the top shelf of my hall closet sits a shallow tin that once held butter cookies and now holds everything else: passport, social security card, the last Christmas card my father signed, a list of account numbers in my own handwriting. I reached for the tin, brought it to the table, and opened it. Beneath the papers lay a fountain pen I never use because it bleeds on cheap paper. I set it next to the tin anyway. My phone buzzed again and again on the counter: Lena, then the planner, then a number I didn't recognize. I let them pile up, neatly. A person can be neat while not answering. The kitchen clock ticked. I could hear the neighbor's dog do his single nightly bark, then settle. A train far off stitched the town to itself with sound. I made tea and didn't drink it. The steam went ghostly, and then ordinary, and then there was only a cup. My father used to say that proof is the courtesy of the strong. He said it when we argued about anything where I wanted to rely on charm. He showed me how to staple receipts to contracts so that no one could pretend to forget who paid whom, when, and why. Whenever he said it, I rolled my eyes and did it his way anyway. I turned on the lamp by the window. The shade threw a crescent of light across the table, a stage bright enough for a legal pad and a laptop. Outside, a car passed and took its engine with it. The house was quiet enough to hear the tea settle back into itself. I slid the tin aside, wiped an imaginary crumb from the table, and opened the laptop. The screen flared patient and blue. I rested my fingertips on the keys and let them learn their work. Then I began to type. The keyboard's tiny weather of clicks carried me past midnight. By the time the furnace sighed on for the first time in hours, I had a list, 3 columns and a page of numbers that made no noise at all. At 6, the sky seeped from iron to pewter. At 7, I dialed. Peter Lang, the voice said. Practiced warmth over sleep's residue. My father's attorney for 30 years, executor of his estate, the man who once brought lemon bars to our house. When my mother died and wrote the eulogy, nobody cried through because it was better to laugh. Peter, it's Marion Ellis. He cleared his throat. Marion, I thought today. He stopped himself. What can I do for you? I need movement on Willow Street, I said. Immediate. A cash buyer if possible. I don't want it listed. A pause, paper shuffling. I pictured him turning from his window, the same office, with the same painting of cattle on a riverbank. You're the sole owner of record. Your father deeded it to you outright. We discussed you considering a transfer later, but nothing was executed. I know. What's the fastest clean clothes you've seen this year? If we pull from my private list, 48 hours, in a best-case scenario, 72 more likely. You'll take a haircut on price for speed. Bring scissors, I said. Line up 2 offers if you can. I'll be at your office at noon to sign anything that cuts time. Marion, he tried to tone first, then ethics. You're certain? I am, he exhaled. I'll make the calls. When we hung up, I felt the strange clarity that follows a hard diagnosis. The plan is this, and so the day is this. I set a pot of coffee to pour itself and called the only other person who could throw wrenches into a well-greased machine. Marta Delgado, the planner, answered, already brisk as if she had slept in her blazer. Somewhere a printer whirred. It's Marion, I said. I'm invoking the cancellation clause. Silence immediate and complete. Then I beg your pardon. Section 8, paragraph 3 I recited. Contracting party may cancel for any reason, compensating vendors for time and materials per attached schedule. I'll authorize all payments this morning. Mrs. Ellis, the rehearsal dinner ended at 9. The string quartet is en route to the club. Hair and makeup are arriving at the hotel at 8:30. The venue has laid linens. There are... She swallowed the number. There are many moving parts. I respect the parts. Send me the totals. I'll wire as soon as each figure is final. But Lena will be disappointed, I said evenly. Copy all vendors on your note. I'll follow each with direct authorization. Her professionalism rallied out of reflex. I'll draft the communications. Please confirm the routing and account information I have on file. I read numbers hung up and moved down the list. Arbor and Vine Florals answered from a delivery van that chirped when the driver opened the door. The chef at Sequoia Catering listened silent but breathing, then said he'd box what could be donated to the shelter. The quartet's first violinist sounded like she had pulled off the highway to cry and didn't want me to hear. At Shutterfinch Photography, a woman with a careful voice told me she would release the date on her site and keep the deposit because that was what we had agreed. I told her I was keeping agreements this morning, and to email the invoice for her staff's time. Everywhere I called, paper floated to the surface. PDFs, contracts with fields highlighted deposit receipts, a folder of my own with Willow Street's wedding. On the spine in my handwriting, the E cramming itself against the D because I'd misjudged the label length. Numbers stacked, calendars adjusted themselves to new emptiness. I authorized transfer after transfer, courtesy of the strong. By 8:30, my phone had populated itself with missed calls like a fabric blooming beads. Lena, 8. Then Drew, then Lena again, then Loretta Baines, then unknown Sequoia Club. I turned the phone face down and finished my coffee cold. One call remained, the one with softer edges and a harder center. I dialed my grandmother's landline with the speed that still lives in my fingers from childhood. "Hello, Agnes," said the small echo of a kitchen behind her. "It's me. You sound like you haven't slept. Is it your stomach?" "It's the wedding." I kept my voice level. "It isn't happening today." I heard a teaspoon find a saucer. "Is the girl sick? Is everyone alive?" "Everyone's alive," I said. "I'll explain when I can. Today I need some quiet." She was quiet with me for 2 beats. "I trust your head," she said finally. "And your hands." That combination has kept us going longer than good luck ever did. "I'll call later," I said, because even on a day like this, manners remember themselves. By 9, the cancellation emails chimed in like distant buoys. By 9:30, the last wire had cleared. The house showed me what it was when it wasn't trying to be helpful, still humming faintly, uncrowded by purpose. I showered and pulled on jeans, a slate sweater. The garment bag in the hall looked like an extra person politely waiting for a bus. The knock at the door didn't sound angry. It sounded urgent, the way people knock when they've been told a house is on fire and they are trying to be the good neighbor. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened it. Lena stood on the porch in leggings and a sweatshirt that might have cost a car payment. No makeup yet, hair in a clip, eyes larger than I remembered because they were ringed in pink. Behind her, the street was ordinary. A recycling truck lumbered past a boy on a scooter, wrote an S with his wheel. "Mom," she said, pushing by me without waiting. In the hallway, she stopped the way dogs do. When a smell is wrong, head up. Nostrils flaring. She took in my sweater, the absence of perfume, the empty hook where my clutch would hang. "Why aren't you dressed? The wedding's not proceeding." I closed the door gently and engaged the chain because some part of me wanted to keep this small. I canceled with Marta this morning. She looked up with the slowness of a person surfacing. "You canceled? What are you saying? No, you're being theatrical." "Where's your dress? You're always early. You said you'd..." Her phone was already in her hand, already dialing. "I'm calling Marta because you've misunderstood something." "Marta can confirm my email," I said. "As can the quartet, the florist, Sequoia Catering, the photographer, the transportation company, and the club." The call rang and rang. I watched the knowledge creep up her face from throat to hairline. She ended it without leaving a message. Opened a new thread, texted with the speed of a stenographer. "She's not responding." Why would she not? Did you threaten her? Did you tell her something? "Do you know what you've done?" I stepped to the kitchen doorway and gestured. "Come sit," I said. "We'll do this at a table." For the first time since she was small, she obeyed reflexively, as if the word seat still contained what it had contained. Then safety food, the end of motion. She sat. Her eyes hit the folders I had placed side by side on the table, their tabs standing up like names at a banquet. She read the tabs aloud, a classroom voice: vendors, school, Willow, renovation. The short version, I said, sitting across from her, is that I organize things by what they are. "That's insane," she said softly. "That is not." The doorbell rang. Lena flinched as if the sound came from inside her. She looked at me, already rehearsing lines, and I shook my head once. "You can send them away if you like," I said, "or you can have them sit and listen." She stared, then swiped tears away with the same efficient movement she used to blot lipstick. "Don't you dare," she began, but her voice failed her at the end, and in the failure there was suddenly space. I let the doorbell ring again and then opened the door. Drew stood on the top step, tie in his pocket, knuckles pale. Behind him were his parents, Loretta and Charles, in a cloud of cologne that belonged to a decade in a club. Loretta's face held concern plated with judgment. Charles's held impatience restrained by manners. "Ms. Ellis," Drew said, trying to smile with half of his mouth so the other half could stay serious. "Marta isn't answering. The club just called. They said there was a misunderstanding." "There isn't," I said. "You're welcome to come in." Loretta stepped over the threshold like a person testing ice. "We're not trying to intrude," she said, "doing it anyway. We just thought." "In the kitchen," I said, and led them to the place where ordinary things happen. Lena didn't stand up. She had the Willow folder in both hands as if it might behave like a shield. When Drew entered, she released it and reached for him. He sat, squeezed her fingers, then looked at the table. "What is all this?" he asked. "Documentation," I said, hearing my father in my mouth and not minding. "If we're going to talk about what exists and what doesn't, we'll do it on paper." Mary and Loretta said the name cordial and sharp, We can clear up the seating issue without theatrics. No one wants to see Agnes uncomfortable. There's no need to escalate. This isn't escalation, I said. This is conclusion. I opened the first folder. Vendors. Marta's master timeline. Deposits with dates and check numbers, the catering invoice with its per-plate math shown in tidy columns, the quartet's contract, the photographer's agreement, the transportation order for 2 coaches and 6 sedans. Post-its marked where money left my hands. The total paid as of this morning, I said, is $82,910, not counting gratuities. I'll now redirect to cancellation fees. The remainder of today's balance was due at noon. That is no longer applicable. Drew stared, counting backward through months he hadn't been attending to. Charles's brow drew together with the quiet of someone doing math to test someone else's math. Loretta's eyes caught on her own initials in an email header and then fled. I thought Drew managed. We were splitting some of the larger line items with my parents based on what you were told, I said, and what you were encouraged to assume. Lena's breath came in sections. I didn't, she started. I never said that is not what. Loretta's napkin would have been useful here. She pressed her lips together as if one might appear. We were under the impression, she said evenly, that we were underwriting the venue and the band while you underwrote nothing, I said without heat. The checks are mine. The contract's mine. The liability today, mine. Marta's clause allows for cancellation by the contracting party. I am the contracting party. Drew looked at his mother, then at me. He seemed for the first time since I had known him uncoached. And why Charles asked, his voice a scale that refused to be pushed around. Are we learning this on the morning of our son's wedding? Because last night I said, turning to Lena, your daughter asked me for a gift I can give. Lena flinched, tears surging new. Don't, she said without finishing the sentence. I closed the vendor's folder and opened the second. School. There's no elegant way to display 20 years of receipts. They crowd each other. I had chosen a handful to make a point without building a shrine. A printout from the bursar for 3 years of private school when our neighborhood school was lowering expectations faster than it raised funds. A spreadsheet checking off test prep sessions and application coaching fees. Statements from Northeastern. Loan disbursement records for the first semester of law school. Then the satisfaction letter when the trust my father had made for Lena did what it was made to do. Why are you showing this? Lena asked, chin lifting, with the anger she used to light her way. Are we meant to clap? Is there a sheet to sign? Take a bow if you must. It's not a bow, I said. It's context, so when I say I have funded your choices, it's still English to you. You'll hear other English in a minute. Drew's hands were on his knees as if he were bracing for impact in a slow-moving crash. Loretta's brows softened, then arranged themselves again. She looked at her son, then at the folder, then at me. I congratulate you on your commitment, she said. The sentence polished and ready for a magazine feature. But what is the point of this display now? I opened the third folder. Willow. Deed. Tax bills. The home insurance statement with my name printed twice in a font designed for people who think clearly. The water bill from the first month they moved in when Drew had left the irrigation system on an extra day and called me to ask why the amount had a comma. The property on Willow Street, I said, was my father's. It is mine now. I let you live there because the lease on your apartment ended and your future plans were easier with a yard. We discussed a transfer after the wedding. We did not execute any transfer. Drew blinked slowly. I thought he said. We thought the house was being gifted, that it was Lena's inheritance. You thought wrong, I said, not unkindly. And you thought wrong because neither of you asked right. Lena stared at the deed as if the paper might recant. You can't sell it, she said, and the sentence startled me with its child cadence. You can't. It's mine because I call it mine. My clothes are there. Our furniture. We painted. We chose the fixtures. You can remove your clothes, I said, and the furniture you own. You can also remove the fixtures you purchased without permission, though I'd advise against it, because you'll lose money doing it. I have a buyer coming to the table within 3 days. You will have keys until 5 tomorrow. After that, what remains becomes donation. Donation. The word hit her like cold water. You're throwing us out on the street. I'm asking you to stand on your own porch, I said. The street is not a given. Drew had turned a slow shade of chalk. He looked at his father. Did you know any of this? Charles shook his head once the honest version of the gesture. I did not. Lena's mouth twisted ugly with something I recognized as panic wearing righteousness like a mask. This is punishment, she said. You're doing this because I was honest yesterday and you couldn't take it. You're vindictive. Yesterday I said you asked me to disappear. Today I am stepping out of the space I have been filling for you since you were born. You will find air there or you won't. Either way, it will be air. Loretta made a small sound and bit it off. Marion, she said, poised again. Whatever occurred yesterday can be repaired with an apology and an adjustment to expectations. There's no need to. I slid a page across the table and tapped my name. We are past need, I said. We are, in fact. The wedding is canceled. The house is for sale. The keys return tomorrow at 5. No one spoke for a long breath. Outside, a delivery truck ground through a gear and moved on. In the silence, I could hear Lena breathe and could not tell whether her breath was a sob swallowing itself or a body remembering it had lungs. Drew stood. He walked to the sink, turned the cold water on, cupped his hands, and didn't drink. He shut it off with care and returned to his chair. When he sat, he looked his age for the first time, no more than 30, a man whose life had been gently coddled by other people's calendars and who had just watched the screen go blank. What happens now, he said and stopped, because even an easy phrase can fail. Now, I said, you contact your guests and save them the drive to the club. You collect what belongs to you from Willow. I'll contact Peter at noon. By late afternoon, I'll know the exact hour of closing. The rest is not mine. Loretta glanced at her son as if calibrating who he was in this moment versus all the moments before. We'll put you up at the house, she said to Drew quietly, and to Lena as an afterthought. Of course. Lena turned her head very slowly as if it had weight she'd never noticed. Thank you, she said, and if the gratitude was a costume, at least she wore it well. She looked back at me. Her face had softened into the version I recognized from childhood when she had been hungry and tired at once and needed someone to decide for her. My body remembered the urge to stand to press her hair to put food in her hand. I remained seated. I can explain all this, she said to Drew, suddenly urgent to repair the shuddering scaffolding. She's making it sound my mother, this is. She looked at me helplessly as if I might provide an angle. I've made it sound like it is, I said. You can add your commentary. The folders lay open, their paper faces too bright. I gathered them and closed them by feel, one on top of the other, the stacks weighed, ordinary and honest. Thank you for coming, I said to the room lightly, like a hostess whose scones had collapsed. You have a list of what matters today. I have one as well. Whoa. Drew pushed his chair back, the scrape small but final. He put a hand on Lena's shoulder, not to comfort her, so much as to guide her toward standing. She didn't stand. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something move, a recognition that did not ask permission. For a second, the angles of her face were exactly the angles of the toddler who once pressed a damp fistful of dandelions into my palm and said, "Hold." I didn't mean it like that, she whispered. I believe you, I said. And I believe that how you meant it matters less than how you said it and what you did for years before you said it. Loretta inhaled. We should go, she said, gentle for once. The longer we stay, the more people gather at the club with no bride to shepherd them. Charles touched the back of Drew's chair, the lightest paternal benediction. We'll manage the calls, he said. We'll speak with the club. I've already spoken with the club, I said. You can speak with the guests. We moved as a small flock to the door. Lena paused, turned back, and looked at the garment bag hanging in the hall, the square shoulder of it, the whisper of silk against plastic when the furnace clicked on. Keep it, she said in a voice I barely heard, or burn it. I don't care. It's yours, I said. Come for it if you want it. Outside, the day had clarified into something sharp enough to see. I watched them descend the steps, Drew steadying his mother, though she did not need steadying, Charles already reaching for his phone, Lena walking as if the earth had shifted half an inch under each slab of sidewalk. I closed the door and slid the chain because the motion made my hands feel like hands. In the kitchen, the table waited without opinion. Light moved a precise rectangle across the wood as if measuring it. I washed the 2 cups in the sink and dried them. I set them upside down on the towel for the pleasure of writing them later. In the living room, I took the garment bag down and laid it across the couch. The blue looked different in daylight, cooler, the color of a thing that knows its job and will do it for whoever wears it. On the counter, the phone rattled a message sliding into place. I turned it over. Peter, too, offers both cash. One closes Friday, one Saturday. Friday buyer requires 2% under your floor. Saturday buyer meets the number but wants to keep the appliances. You can say no. I typed Friday and then added keys transferred by 5 tomorrow. Draft the addendum. His reply came before my thumb left the screen. On it. I set the phone down and let the house talk to itself. After a while, I opened the hall closet and reached the top shelf for a battered overnight bag with a loose zipper tab I always meant to fix. I set it on the chair and didn't fill it yet. The act of setting it there was enough. It made a small shape in the air. On the table, the folders had made indentations in the wood, pale rectangles that would disappear by evening. I ran my hand over them once. It felt like rubbing a language smooth. By noon, I had eaten toast over the sink and listened to the quiet knock of my own front door in my memory. I took the folders, put them into the tin, and returned the tin to the closet. When I closed the door, the tiny click sounded like an instrument tuning 2 notes, finding one another's edges. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and noticed a thing I hadn't noticed before. My shoulders were not where they usually sat, two stubborn stones under my ears. They'd dropped an inch, maybe two, enough to make breathing feel like something a body might do without instruction. I rinsed the cup again because the ritual pleased me, then turned off the light above the sink, then turned it back on because that pleased me more. The house held, the air held. The day had a shape that matched the list I had written in the dark. When I left for Peter's office, the street had returned to itself, the truck gone, the boy on the scooter vanished into a school day, the recycling bins already cocked at their own angles like exhausted dancers. I locked the door and put the keys in my pocket and walked to the car. The car started on the first try. The radio came on and offered a song that had once played at an ice rink birthday party when Lena was 9 and thought a sequined headband could change a life. I turned the volume down, not off. Something about hearing a familiar thing made the morning's edges settle. At the third light, I caught my reflection in the side mirror, a woman in a slate sweater with a calm mouth and a road in front of her. The mirror repeated what the kitchen had already told me there was space where the stones had been. I drove to the office where Peter and the Cattle River painting lived, and I parked in his usual guest spot because I had always been invited. Inside, the receptionist smiled in the particular way of people who know nothing and everything at once. "Good morning, Ms. Ellis," she said, and handed me a pen. The signature lines were already flagged with cheerful arrows. I wrote my name where the arrows pointed. The ink looked like it had always wanted this job. By the time I walked back to my car, the sun had climbed to a place where it stopped trying to be gentle. I put my palm on the roof, felt the heat begin, and took it away. The minute before touching and the minute after are different. My hand remembered both. At home, the voicemail light winked. I let it. The garment bag lay on the couch as it had before, a quiet fact. I moved it to the closet, and because I wanted to smooth the plastic a final time, I made a sandwich without looking for the knife I always misplace. I ate it at the table where the light now had shifted to the other end. Outside, somewhere down the block, a child laughed in the exact rhythm of a jump rope song. The phone trilled once more. I silenced it. The silence did not press back. On the edge of the table sat a pen I never used because it bled on cheap paper. I took the cap off and watched a bright bead collect at the point and not fall. It looked like something promising the possibility of staying and then choosing not to. In the other room, the furnace clicked off. The house made a settling noise that sounded like an old friend thumping your back in a way that requires no words. I stood up to wash the plate, and then without reason other than wanting to, I sat down again. The day had done what it came to do. The stack of paper had done what paper does when it is allowed to be seen. My hands, which had carried trays in a diner, swabbed a child's forehead at 3 a.m, signed mortgage checks, buttoned costumes for school plays, in the cramped wings of auditoriums, had completed a different kind of work. Clean, slow, documented. When the sun slid a degree lower and the rectangle on the table moved with it, I took the overnight bag from the chair and put a sweater in it. Then I zipped it, because sometimes finishing one small thing is the proper way to let a house know you are paying attention. I washed my hands, and for the first time in days, the water across my knuckles felt not like a remedy, but an ordinary thing, cool, sufficient, exactly itself. By morning, the house had the blank feeling of a stage after the curtain. I loaded the overnight bag and a box of files into the trunk, locked the door, and drove to Willow Street. The Colonial looked like it always had from the sidewalk. Measured shutter square stance only, the garage stood half open, a rib of cardboard visible inside. I let myself in with the key that had always worked. The air held the sharp sweetness of packing tape. In the living room, rectangles of dust showed where furniture had been. Upstairs, closet rods ran bare except for 2 wire hangers like punctuation. In the bedroom, once my father's, then Lena's, someone had wiped the window glass and left a perfect oval in the fog where their hand had steadied. On the floor sat a neat stack, a bundle of place cards. She'd never tie a paper flower from an old school project, the cheap frame that used to hold a photograph of us at a playground slide. On the sill lay an envelope with my name. The handwriting belonged to Drew Tite, disciplined a lawyer's script. I opened it in the quiet. Marion, we will have the keys back to you by 5. I don't know how to apologize for not seeing clearly sooner. Lena and I are taking a room at my parents' while we sort the rest. Your decisiveness was painful but clarifying. Thank you for making the calls I should have made. D. I returned the letter to the envelope and set it under the place cards so it wouldn't drift. The house didn't require a farewell. It had contained too many already. On my way out, I checked the refrigerator, emptied, wiped. The porch light was off. I locked the door and admitted to the concrete step and the geranium in its chipped pot that not everything I had loved needed me to keep standing. Back at my bungalow, the clock read 10. Peter texted Friday, buyer confirmed. Funds by close of business. I answered understood and set the phone face down beside the kettle. Then I sat at the kitchen table because tables are where decisions behave. Around noon, my mother arrived without phoning first. Agnes came up the walk in a camel coat that shut against her throat as if a high button could keep a day out. "You look taller," she said at the door, eyeing me as if checking a shelf she'd dusted. "Is it your shoes or did something let go?" "The second thing," I said. She nodded and hung her coat on the back of a chair. She poured herself water from the tap like a person visiting a child she trusts to maintain pipes. "You canceled a wedding," she said mildly. "That will give the town enough to chew for a week." "I sold a house," I said. "That will give the town indigestion." She took a sip. "Do you need me to drive anywhere behind you?" "Not today." She scanned my face for a long breath, then went to my small hallway and stood before the garment bag folded over the couch. "Pretty," she said. "Wrong day for it." "Wrong person for it," I said. She nodded again, came back, set her palm over mine. "I'm making a pot roast," she said, as if stating a weather pattern, "so you'll want to leave before it makes me sentimental." She left me a brown paper bag with 2 apples and a hard candy tucked under them in case you forget to eat. Kissed my temple in the doorway and went. When the door latched, I felt the exact size of my life in the room, no bigger than usual, no smaller. At 4:30, Drew returned with Lena to hand over the keys. They didn't cross my threshold. We exchanged them on the stoop, the way neighbors do when borrowing sugar. Lena wore sunglasses, though the sky had already gone to late October pewter. She handed me a dry cleaner's plastic sleeve with the sea glass dress I hadn't asked for. "You forgot this," she said. "You keep it," I answered. "She can't," Drew said quietly. "We're not keeping much." I accepted the plastic and the weight inside it and the keys that clicked in my palm with the finality of a door that knows its job. They turned away first. I watched them until the corner, then went inside and set the dress down as if it belonged to a guest who might change her mind and come back for it. By 7, I was through with rooms and their echoes. I zipped the overnight bag, placed the tin of documents in the trunk under the blanket, turned off each lamp with a click that sounded like a metronome returning to 0, and went to bed. Sleep found me without negotiation. The road south unspooled under a sky the color of paper. I took the long way past soybean fields gone the color of straw through a strip of pines that smelled like a pencil factory, along a stretch where marsh pressed close to the shoulder and herons lifted off like folded letters. I stopped at a gas station with a hand-lettered sign for fresh biscuits and bought coffee that tasted exactly like gas station coffee and therefore tasted like freedom. By noon, the road had traded oak for live oak, the branches shouldering one another under gray-green leaves. I crossed a bridge and the air changed brinnier as if something had been rinsed farther down the line. The town appeared in pieces, weathered porches, white steeples, a marina that kept its own time. A sign announced Beaufort Historic District in a font that trusted its own vowels. The realtor met me on Front Street, across from the waterfront, where the masts made their joint arithmetic against the sky. "Tessa Markham," she said, offering a hand I wanted to trust immediately, sunscreen-scented steady. She was mid-60s, chin-length, gray hair, sandals in October. "I'm Marion," I said. "I'm looking for something that won't tell me what it used to be." Tessa smiled. "Then we'll start small and honest and let the light do the persuading." House 1 sat on Ann Street behind a picket fence salted with rust. A 1-story salt box repainted a shade between butter and caution tape with a deep porch and a tidy magnolia. Inside the sensible renovation quartz that looked like stone but cleaned like laminate plank floors that clicked into themselves a kind of rightness you could buy. I stood at the back door and watched sunlight ladder itself over the grass. "It's the kind you can live in by Tuesday," Tessa said. "It's the kind that won't object to a person sitting and thinking," I said. "But it doesn't know my name." House 2 overlooked Taylor's Creek from a second-floor balcony, the view interrupted only by a strip of marsh where egrets wrote white sentences across the green. Newer construction and thin walls that echoed a homeowners association, determined to keep the mailboxes uniform. The staircase made a pretty curve, but the handrail felt like it had opinions. I touched the balcony rail and imagined Weather finding it too easily. "It'll resell well," Tessa said, pragmatic as a good teacher. "You'll have neighbors who walk in the morning and wave." "I like waves," I said, "but I don't need an audience." House 3 sat a little off the obvious map down a side street that ended in water. A cottage wide-hipped, cedar-shingled, weathered to the calm of driftwood. A small yard with palmetto and salt-tough grass. The Sound lay at its back shoulder to shoulder with a narrow dock that sloped with the tide. The front door stuck at the bottom, then relented with a sigh. "Built in the 70s, barely touched," Tessa said as we stepped into the stillness. "Windows have been replaced, roofs new, original cabinets sturdy as old shoes if you can live with them. Bones are right." I walked through the rooms and could feel the angles behaving. In the main bedroom, a window framed the water so precisely it felt like being given a picture every morning. In the kitchen, someone had once papered the walls with a tiny strawberry print. Only a border remained as if a memory had refused to scrub off. Out on the dock, the tide ran a dark green seam toward the inlet. A skiff coughed past the driver, lifting 2 fingers in the local hello. A pelican made the kind of landing no engineer would recommend, and then looked pleased with itself. The planks moved under my feet, not enough to unsettle, just enough to confirm the water was alive. "This is the one," I said. Tessa didn't feign surprise. "I'll draft an offer that takes kindness into account. Widow moving inland to be near her daughter. She's not looking to squeeze blood from anyone." We signed in her office where the air conditioner persisted out of principle and a bowl of saltwater taffy had bleached to pastels. The numbers added themselves without resistance. Peter's wire arrived before the pen left the last signature line. When Tessa passed me a set of temporary keys with a plastic tag that read Sound Cottage, the plastic felt like a promise paper would honor. I rented a room over a cafe where the floor had learned to tilt without complaint and spent 2 nights between salt-rinsed sheets while due diligence counted its days. On the 3rd afternoon, I stood in the cottage with the door open to the breeze and watched a man in a white cap rebuild the dock ladder rung by rung. Tessa sent a handyman named Rufus, who was kind to poor decisions. He patched what needed patching and left the rest of the house to its preferences. I bought a broom and a small rug the color of low tide and a lamp with a shade that did nothing but repeat the light. When the papers closed, the house did not change. The air changed. The rooms accepted my things as if they'd been expecting them: the chipped blue bowl, the narrow bookshelf, the chair that had learned the shorthand of my back. I unpacked slowly, not to savor any metaphor, but because slowness fit the place, as if speed would make the boards forget themselves. Mornings came in pieces first. The gulls, then the light, then the sound of a single outboard motor coughing awake. I walked along the water with a cup of coffee that had learned how to cool at sea level. My shoulders behaved like natives, not tourists. The phone stayed face down more often than not. When I did turn it over, there were fewer messages. Loretta had sent a single note: "We've informed everyone." Peter had sent 3 words: "Recorded. Keys delivered." Lena had sent nothing since the stoop. On the 5th day, I drove to the hardware store and bought a paintbrush and a quart of something called Oyster Bay. I painted the trim around the bedroom window where the light pooled at noon, not because it needed paint, but because I wanted the brush to learn the grain. The stroke left a narrow brightness, a border between view and frame. That evening, I took a folding chair to the edge of the dock. Boats plugged their small lights into the falling dark one by one. Across the water, someone's radio murmured a song that had known how to be gentle for 40 years. The tide turned with a private sound, more pressure than noise. I rested my feet on the lowest rung and let the boards do their mild living sway. A text arrived from my mother. "When you have a bed that doesn't argue with my back, I'll come. I'll bring chess." I wrote back, soon, and watched the tiny word go. Then I slid the phone into my pocket and forgot it there. Night took the edges off the dock until it felt less like a rectangle and more like a thought. I sat until the mosquitoes found me and the stars broke into their separate jobs. Inside the cottage held the dark without alarm. The chair knew my back. The lamp repeated the light. The tide ran under the porch as if it had always known how to pass a house and leave it standing. The tide changed under the dock with the soft insistence of a hand smoothing a sheet. I stayed until the boards cooled, then went inside, let the screen door whisper shut, and slept. By late morning, the phone blinked with a single voicemail from Peter. The new owners on Willow found a false panel in the main closet. Behind it, safety deposit key, some paperwork in your father's hand. I've collected it. Come when you can. His office smelled faintly of lemon oil and old folders. Agnes came with me, buttoned into a navy sweater, as if discretion were weather. Peter set a leather portfolio on the table and stepped out, closing the door without letting it latch. My father's handwriting stood up on thick paper in the straight strokes of a man who believed ink should behave. The date at the top lived 15 years in the past. He wrote that he had verified what I never proved: Calvin Reed, Lena's father, had diverted money from his employer in small, neat bites. He'd left when suspicion grew teeth. He'd surfaced months later in Arizona as Daniel Carr married, stable on the surface, 2 children. My father had chosen silence, repaid the missing funds anonymously, and established the education trust I later spent without asking why it felt like restitution. He left no instruction, only information and the belief that I would know when to use it. We turned to the back of the portfolio and found the other kind of paper: photocopied licenses, addresses, notes, in my father's type marginalia, and a list of phone numbers that looked like a map trying not to be. Agnes traced a line with one finger and let her hand rest. We didn't talk for a while. The office clock made an honest noise. Beyond the window, the courthouse oak held still for its own reasons. "What you do with it is your business," Agnes said at last, not as permission, but as recognition. I had imagined anger or relief or the compulsion to correct every story that had gone crooked over the years. What arrived instead was a plain clarity that fit in my chest without jostling anything. I closed the portfolio and left my palms on the leather until my hands felt like hands. At the print shop off Front Street, the clerk slid a proof across the counter, a simple folio cream cover, black coil, the first page, a brief note in my voice. This material was discovered during the sale of Willow Street. The documents are accurate to the best of my knowledge. No commentary, no prescriptions. Behind it, copies of the records in order, a final page with an address and a phone number in Phoenix that Peter had verified that morning. I asked the clerk to add a plain pocket at the back and slipped a photo into it. Lena at 5 on my father's lap. Both of them caught mid-story mouths open on a word. I sealed the folio in a rigid envelope and wrote "for Lena" on the label. Peter arranged a courier to the Baines address with a signature requirement that did not care who signed. The second thing I prepared was smaller, a wooden box from a shop that smelled like cedar and beeswax. Inside it, the same photograph and a card with 3 lines in blue ink. Origins are real. So are choices. Choose with both eyes open. No name, no address. Peter called the Willow buyers. They agreed to let Drew collect a personal box from the empty mantel before they moved furniture in. The grace was theirs, not mine. Agnes rode back to the cottage with the portfolio-shaped quiet between us. She stood at the bedroom window for a time and watched a skiff cut a clean diagonal across the Sound. That frame will keep a person honest, she said, meaning the view or maybe the work of looking. We made tea and didn't sweeten it. In the late light, the room gave itself in small squares, lamp on the table, brush on the sill, the blue bowl holding a pair of keys I no longer needed. When the kettle spit the last bit of steam, Agnes set her cup down and rested both hands around it. "You've got a chair that forgives my back," she said. "I'll stay the night." The courier texted a timestamp at 10 the next morning. Delivered. Signed, Baines, C. A minute later, Peter Mantelbox retrieved. Then nothing. The phone lay face down on the counter and looked like something that had run out of announcements. Outside, the water kept doing its work without asking for a diagram. I walked to the end of the dock with a glass of water and sat. A shrimp boat purred by its nets, dark against the brighter day. A boy on the far shore practiced casting and looked pleased each time the line uncurled cleanly. In the pocket of my sweater, the phone ticked in that tiny way a person knows even when pretending not to. I left it where it could be. Agnes slept in the chair and woke at noon. We ate sandwiches the size of sensible decisions. She crossed one ankle over the other and studied the baseboards as if they might confess something. "You'll need a heavier blanket come December," she said. "This place keeps its own weather." I drove her to the bus in late afternoon. At the station, she hugged me twice, once for before, once for after. Back at the cottage, the air had turned the precise color of oyster shells. The photograph I hadn't included lay on the table, a duplicate from the print shop, edges still warm from the cutter. I set it in the drawer with the paintbrush and closed the drawer softly. Night came with its handful of boat lights. Somewhere across the Sound, a dog made one declarative bark and thought better of it. On the dock, the boards gave their small living shift. I breathed the salt and whatever else the water contained, and the house behind me kept the light exactly where I'd left it. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.